welcome back to Food Prep Guide. We are back in the kitchen today with another canning tutorial. This time we are making an Amish sweet pickle relish. I am flooded with cucumbers. We are snacking on them constantly putting them in our salads. I've already made up tons and tons of dill pickles, and I have noticed that some of our cucumbers were hiding and they got a little bit too big and they got a little bit too getting some yellowing on them. Let me get you a better example. Here's a good example of like the yellowing and stuff, even though this one again didn't get too big. It is really misshapen. But anyway, when they get to the point where we didn't pick them in time and they got a little bit too big, then it is time to make relish. That's what I use for my relishes. It happens every year. It almost feels impossible to get every cucumber just in time because they are camouflaged, and there are days when I just don't feel like going out and harvesting. But that's okay. The extra big cucumbers are great for relish. So we're going to get canning some Amish sweet pickle relish. This is something that we use in our potato salad, tuna salad, and chicken salads. We don't eat enough hot dogs and hamburgers throughout the year to really make preserving a large batch of sweet relish worth it, but we do eat chicken salad, tuna salad, and potato salad pretty regularly, and that's what we use this recipe for. Let's get started. Welcome to Food Prep Guide. My name is Jordan. I'm a homeschooling mom to 3, living on 3 beautiful acres with my wonderful husband. A health crisis forced our family to change the way we think about food. Unfortunately, it also put us in financial hardship. Thankfully, the solution to both challenges was the same: to live off the land as much as possible. For us, that means growing a garden, preserving the harvest, raising chickens, and cooking from scratch. It's definitely a family affair. And friends, too. Meet Stacy, researcher, author, and lifelong learner. She entered the world of food preservation in the crazy days of 2020. She joined a gleaning co-op, and a local grocer offered her clearance produce in bulk. And so the adventure began. Together, we're reclaiming the old ways of food stewardship and teaching them to the next generation. If there's one thing you should know about us, it's that we love Jesus and seek to steward his blessings wisely. Our table always has room for one more, so y'all come join us. Real quick before we get into chopping the cucumbers and everything, this recipe calls for 6 bell peppers. That's going to go be minced up into your relish. I don't have any fresh peppers coming in right now. My peppers are still weeks away from being ripe and ready. So I'm going to be using my dehydrated peppers from last year. You can absolutely use your dehydrated foods in canning recipes, but they have to be rehydrated first because they will mess with your liquid ratio in your canning recipe if you don't rehydrate them first. So on average, it takes about 1 tablespoon of peppers to equal the average sized bell pepper. So since we need about 6 bell peppers, I'm going to do 6 tablespoons of this pepper mixture. 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I already have hot water in this bowl, so now I'm just going to set this aside, and this can be rehydrating while we are working on chopping up our cucumbers and onions. So I just wanted to share that tip real quick for you in case you don't have any bell peppers either. Okay, let's chat about the setup real quick right here. I have my washed and cleaned cucumbers, an empty bowl to put our minced cucumbers in, a measuring cup. This is an 8-cup measuring cup, and then I have my food processor here. So we need to start with 20 cups of cucumbers. Now I have a pen and paper just off camera here. I'm going to try to track how many cucumbers it takes to get that 20 cups of cucumbers. I started out with just washing 10 cucumbers, but I have plenty on hand in case we need some more. And I will try to keep track of that and let you know how many cucumbers ended up getting me 20 cups of minced cucumbers. So we are just going to chop the ends off, and then I'm just going to rough chop and start filling up my food processor with cucumbers. Okay. Get a spatula, run it down real quick, just to get everything nice and evenly minced. And I am just going to keep doing that until I get 20 cups of minced cucumbers like this, and I will let you know how many cucumbers that turned out to be. Okay, this is my last batch. I've got 16 cups of minced cucumber in my bowl over here. This should give me about 4 cups, and it does. So that's 20 cups total. And it took 15 cucumbers to get 20 cups of minced cucumbers. And I would say this is about the average size of cucumbers that I used. Way too big for pickling, but good for making relishes. Just to give you a rule of thumb for as you're deciding how many cucumbers you'll need for this recipe. It took about 15 of these cucumbers to get 20 cups of minced cucumbers. Okay, so now we need basically to do the same thing with 6 onions. Okay, I had forgotten my onions, but I had to go out to the garage and get some. We cured these together in a recent video on harvesting and preserving onions. We decided not to preserve or not to cure all of our onions this year. We decided to go ahead and put most of them up in ready-to-use formats. If you are interested in that video, I will link it in the description box below. But for this recipe, we just need 6 onions. 6 whole onions, and we're going to mince them just like we did our cucumbers. I'm using my food processor, but of course you can mince them up with a knife. If you don't have a food processor, I think a blender might work good too. I've never done this in a blender before, like tried to mince vegetables, but I've heard some people have and it works out pretty good, so try that too. Good. It's about the size that we want. And I'm just going to continue doing this until I have all 6 onions, and I'm just going to add them straight into my big bowl of cucumbers right over here. Okay, here is our cucumber and onion mixture. The last thing we need to add is those bell peppers. Remember, we need 6 bell peppers for this recipe. They can be red or green, doesn't matter. But I am using my rehydrated bell peppers, which we measured out earlier. And we just let them rehydrate while we were doing all that chopping, and now they're good and rehydrated. So now we just need to, where's my spatula? There it is. Now we just need to give everything a good stir before we add in our salt. This salt isn't necessarily going to be for flavoring, or not just for flavoring, I should say, but it's for drawing out moisture from this mixture. The cucumbers are obviously extremely high moisture, extremely high water content. And we want to draw out some of that water content before we can up the relish, before we add in our brine. Get everything good and stirred. Okay, so now we need 1 cup of canning salt. Canning salt is just, let me rinse it off real quick. Canning salt is just salt that doesn't have any anti-caking agents or any additives added to it. It's non-iodized. It is just salt. So you don't necessarily need a super specialty salt for this. Like, you don't have to go out and actually buy pickling salt, which that's what pickling salt is, by the way. It's just salt that doesn't have any additives to it and hasn't been iodized. For instance, this came from a 50-pound bag of just Morton's sea salt. So it's not technically pickling salt, but just anything. Man, I cannot get this out. I have used pink salt before. I've used Redmond's real salt. I wouldn't use my Celtic salt for this just because that's a super duper high quality salt, inexpensive, but this Morton's sea salt is excellent. Doesn't have any additives in it. So 1 cup of that salt, and again, we're going to mix it really well. And then we're just going to stick this in the refrigerator for 2 hours, and that salt is going to begin to draw out as much moisture as possible out of these cucumbers. Of course, it's still going to be very moist. But let's put this in the fridge for 2 hours, and then we'll rinse it out and we'll be back. Okay, our soaking time is just about up, so we need to go ahead and get our brine ready, because once the soak time is over, this process really speeds up. So we're going to start out with 4 cups of sugar. Into that, we will add 6 cups of distilled white vinegar. You can use any kind of vinegar. You could add apple cider vinegar if you want to make it extra tangy. The important part is that it's a minimum of 5% acidity, which this vinegar is 5% acidity. We need 6 cups. Don't quite got it. And 6. And then we need our seasonings, which is just mustard celery and celery seed. Mustard seed and celery seed. So we will start with 4 tablespoons of mustard seed. 2, 3, 4. And to that, we will add 2 teaspoons of celery seed. And 2. And then we just need to mix it all together. And then I'm going to head out to the garage where my cucumber mixture is hanging out in the refrigerator. And while we do that, we will have this brine coming up to a boil while we rinse and strain off the liquid from our vegetable mixture. Okay, so after your veggie mixture is done soaking, you want to rinse it under cold running water, like in a strainer. And that's just basically getting most of that salt out. Some of that salt is going to soak in, which is good. It adds some flavor. But you want to get most of that salt kind of out of there. That was mostly to extract moisture. And you can see the relish mixture is a lot thicker now, a lot drier. And it is ready to go into the brine. The brine has just come up to the boil, so now we're going to transfer the veggie mixture into the brine. Now I'll just add this mixture to the brine. Try and do it without not splashing too terribly bad. Give it a good stir. I'm going to keep it on high heat and make sure that this mixture comes back up to a boil, and then we're going to boil for 10 minutes. I won't start the timer until this comes back to a boil, but then once it does, oh, hope it sounds like it's already starting. Yep, it's already starting. Okay, so 10 minutes, and then we're ready to can. Okay, while that mixture is boiling, we need to go ahead and prep our canner. So I'm thinking we're going to get around 8 pints for this recipe is generally what it yields, plus or minus 1. So I've got the canner water halfway full, And then I've got each jar halfway full with water. That's just to keep them from floating around and falling over. I'm going to put my eye on medium heat and have these jars coming up in from room temperature to hot in preparation to put that boiling hot mixture into the jars in just a second. Okay, here is our relish, very hot, sitting on a hot pad, and we have our jars here. I just took them out of the canner. They're still pretty warm. We need our canning funnel, and then we're just going to ladle and fill each jar to 1/2 inch headspace. And then I'm going to use a debubble tool. You can use a chopstick, a butter knife, or a debubble tool like this one. This is something that comes in like a, if you were to buy a canning kit, this tool would come in with it. Debubbling just helps get all those air pockets out and creates as high quality of a product as possible. Let me get a wet rag to clean off the rims. Anytime you've got something real sugary, you'll want to wipe the rims real good, because sugary equals sticky, which could interfere with your seal. Then we're going to screw our ring to fingertip tight, which is just to the point of resistance and a 1/4 turn more, and that's ready to go into the canner. Let's do one more. Fill it up to 1/2 inch headspace. When you buy a debubble tool that comes in a canning kit, it has headspace measurements on it. I'll show you that in just a second. Yeah, I'm way below that one. Let's see. Okay, here are those markings I was telling you about. Let's see where 1/2 inch headspace is. I don't use it anymore, so I don't really know. Here it is. But you just put it on the edge of your jar, put it on the 1/2 inch mark, and then the tip should be touching the bottom of your product, which mine is. Or once you've been canning for a while, you can kind of get used to where the headspace is, judging by where these little protrusions are on the lid. This bottom one right here is 1 inch, and then halfway in between here and the top is going to be 1/2 inch, which is typically this little ring right here. And that's usually what I go by. Let me go ahead and debubble. Wipe the rim. Clean lid. And a clean ring. Fingertip tight. Ooh, hot. And into the canner it goes. Okay, let's get these down underneath the water and check our water level. We want to be at least submerged by 1 inch of water, and we are. I'm going to put my lid on and turn my heat up all the way to the high. And we're going to wait until this comes to a hard rolling boil before we set our processing time. We are at a hard rolling boil, so now we can set our time, and this recipe needs to process for 10 minutes. If you live above 1,000 feet elevation, you'll need to add time. Be sure to reference a canning chart from the National Center for Food Home Preservation. They have charts that let you know how much time to add for your elevation. But I am below 1,000 feet, so this relish recipe only needs to process for 10 minutes. Okay, the timer went off about 5 minutes ago. I've just been letting them sit here, just try to transition them back to room temperature. Of course, it's still a lot hotter than room temperature at this point, but keeping them in the canner with the eye turned off and letting them sit for 5 minutes helps avoid thermal shock. So they've been sitting for about 5 minutes, and here is what the finished product looks like. I actually ended up with enough relish to make 2 pints plus a little bit left over, which I'll just put in the fridge. So this recipe ended up yielding 10 pints of this Amish sweet relish. We do have a dill pickle recipe if you're not a huge fan of relish and would rather have some dill pickles. We will link that on the screen somewhere right around there and down in the description box. That's all for today, and we'll see you next time. Bye!